Gotcha.
Well
Appreciate
done on all
you.
this today, Aaron. Can't wait.
Thank you. Appreciate that. If you are not a speaker today, if you could keep your video off for now. When we come to Q&A, we will be using the chat window. If you could, at that time, and I'll remind you then, if you could use the chat window, our friends in the media, to indicate your wish to ask a question. You will be able to turn on your video and audio during Q&A. So otherwise, if you could keep your video off and your line muted.
Aaron, sorry, I was just getting ready for this. It's John here, and I just was having to deal with some other things, and so did I miss anything that you were instructing me to do or not to do? That
you did not, Mary. I was saying hello and that it was nice to see you again.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry about that, but
that's quite okay. I figured you were having a different conversation. No problem at all. No problem. So we're 3 minutes here, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank everyone for being here, especially our VIPs and speakers. I'll thank you again formally as we go through the program, but to media as well, really appreciate your interest in making time for this today. And a reminder to those who have joined us for our speakers and VIPs, we will be taking a group photo at the end of this. If you could stay after we say goodbye to media, after the Q&A portion. We will take a group photo if you're able to hang on so that we can thank you on social media.
Aaron, as part of the formal agenda, is Mayor Tory still debuting his solo performance that he's been writing?
Okay, Joe.
I understood there was maybe a duo or a trio coming out of City Hall.
Yeah, that's right. That'll kill the audience in no time. We'll be doing damage to live music by doing that. The idea is to help live music here.
Yes. It's okay. We've engaged a professional artist, so you're all off the hook.
I sit down with my grandchildren now and play the piano by ear, and they just look at me funny instead of, I can do it, but that's I've lost everything else.
Okay, we're 1 minute. To my team, I will begin formally at 12 noon. I'm watching the clock here. Hello to our friends on YouTube. The last minute is always the longest. All right. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Erin Benjamin, and I am the president and CEO of the Canadian Live Music Association, and I am here in chilly Ottawa. It's very cold today. As you may know, it had been our hope to bring this event to you live streamed from one of Toronto's best loved venues, the Lula Lounge. Given circumstances, we understand why we could not, but we would like to thank our friends at Lula, Tracy Jenkins and her team, and we hope to be back with you again soon. So thank you very much to all of you who are joining us from across the city of Toronto and across Canada. Thank you for your interest in the future of the live music industry. The research and recommendations we are presenting today, we believe, will help to amplify and address the dire situation in which many live music venues in Toronto and other cities across Canada find themselves today. Before I introduce our first speaker, I would like to state that the Canadian Live Music Association honors and acknowledges the land that we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations across Canada, and that the leadership of the live music industry has a duty to acknowledge our relationship to the land upon which we live and work, and to prioritize initiatives that support reconciliation with local Indigenous communities. I would like to thank our sponsors and partners, the Dundas West BIA, the Lula Lounge, Resound, Music Canada, Destination Toronto, and especially the Downtown Young BIA, the Toronto BIA, the City of Toronto, all of whom this project would not have been possible without your leadership. So thank you very much. I would also like to thank our funding partner, Ontario Creates. Okay, I think we're ready to go on with the show. It is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, my good friend, Jesse Kumagai, the CEO of the Corporation of Massey Hall and Roy Thompson Hall. Jesse currently sits as a member of the Toronto Music Advisory Committee, as a board member of the Unison Benevolent Fund, the Polaris Music Prize, and is, of course, our beloved chair of the board of the Canadian Live Music Association. Over to you, Jesse.
Thank you very much, Erin, and welcome everybody. I'm thrilled that everybody's joined us for this this important announcement today, and I'm also very pleased that we've got Mayor Tory joining us as well. I think a lot of you know that the mayor has been an incredible champion and ally for our sector from day one. And Mr. Mayor, you know, we're just grateful that you've taken so much time to focus your attention on the live music sector and recognize its importance from not just the cultural and social aspect, but also the economic impact. So we're thrilled. We know that you do a lot behind the scenes as well, working with the province and the federal government, championing Toronto and specifically our music scene here. And obviously, when we get into the findings of this study, we're going to find that it's going to take a village to make sure that we all get through this and get to the other side. But there's an incredible amount of opportunity here. So we're just really glad to have you along for the ride on this one. In terms of the study, I think it's, you know, what we're going to find is that even though we entered into this in very, very different times, and clearly the pandemic has you know, seriously disrupted, to say the very least, our sector. We knew that the live music scene was under a degree of threat to begin with, even before the pandemic came along. And hopefully what we'll see in the study are not just the articulation of the economic power that live music has to bring to bear on a city in terms of driving job creation, driving tourism, attracting businesses, but also it really is going to highlight some of the fragility that we're experiencing right now. And thankfully, there's some great recommendations coming forward that, you know, like I said, it's going to take a village to address the problem. But if we all work hard together, we're going to be able to get to the other side and be able to not only take advantage of the full opportunity that exists for that economic impact, and you know, just the betterment of lives of Torontonians across the board, but we're also going to be able to really address some of those threats that face us. And I know that through the Toronto Music Advisory Council, we've already taken some great strides towards trying to protect venues. And the next steps, though, are the really critical ones, as we've started to see an alarming increase in the number of venues that are either closing or on the cusp of it. So the actions we take in the next little while, hopefully informed by the study, will do a lot to get us through to the other side. So looking forward to being able to share this with everybody, and very much looking forward to working with everybody here on all of those next steps. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jesse. Appreciate your comments. Next, I'd like to introduce a man who barely needs an introduction. Mayor Tory is the 65th mayor of Toronto. He was born and raised in the city. He spent his life giving back to the city that he loves. As many of you like me know, he is, as Jesse said, a passionate supporter of music, leading Toronto's Music City initiative, ensuring live music venues are being considered in development proposals, and most recently bringing much needed property tax relief to venues. He's been a consistent, fierce, tenacious voice for our industry, and it's an honor to have him with us today to help us officially launch this study. Ladies and gentlemen and friends, please welcome the Mayor of the City of Toronto, John Tory.
I think I'm unmuted now, Mayor. Erin, thank you very much. And I should say that I come by it honestly because I am the nephew of, the cousin of professional musicians. I am the father of a music school graduate who works for Live Nation. So he works in the, and presently, by the way, you wouldn't want me saying this, but it's just the truth. He's on what they politely call furlough at the moment because of what's, you know, we're talking about here in the sort of post-pandemic period. But there was a lot going on in the pre-pandemic period too in this business. And it is, I'll say in my own brief remarks today, why I'm so committed to helping the sector, because I believe it is so important in so many different ways to the well-being of our city, and for that matter, of the country. I want to make a special note of the fact that some of my council colleagues are here, who you know very well, Deputy Mayors Anna Bylaw and Michael Thompson, members of the Toronto Music Advisory Committee, Joe Cressy, who co-chairs the Toronto Music Advisory Committee, and he also chairs the Board of Health, so he's got his plate full at the moment. And but they are people, among others, including Gary Crawford and others, who are passionate supporters of the arts, as am I, because we think it's just fundamental to the well-being of the city, and that includes, of course, the music business. And I want to thank Jesse, Christian Roberts, Sean Bowring, Mark Garner. They've all been instrumental in making all of this happen. So I'm happy that they're here as well. And what is, I think, a very important day, because it gives us not just an analysis of how important things are and how difficult things are, but a roadmap going forward that we can all sort of work on together to help make things better. You know, it was acknowledged by somebody, I don't know if it was you, Aaron, or Jesse at the beginning, that we had issues, challenges facing the live music industry before the pandemic came. I mean, some of the things that were mentioned earlier on with respect to the redevelopment of the city and how that put so much pressure on and caused places to be closed that, were in a huge part of our legacy, a part of my own growing up, the places you went to see live music. And then the pandemic came, and of course it caused even more massive dislocation, both for places, but I think in a way, even more importantly, for people. For artists. I mean, if there's no performances allowed because no venues can be open, then the artists can't do what they do. And it's do what they do for their own well-being, and so on, but also do what they do to earn a living. And of course, that then has a cascading effect out onto the entire city in many different respects. What we're doing today, of course, is making public a long-awaited study that talks about and maybe illustrates for people something they don't know, which is the impact and the importance of this industry, the live music industry, on the city's economic and cultural fabric. We partnered with the Live Music Association and others, as you've heard, the BIA and so on, and with Ontario Creates, most importantly, because I think they came up with most of the money talks, to get Norda City to have a look at all of this and do it in a way that then could allow us to take something that was thoughtfully and carefully and objectively done and use it both as a roadmap, but also as a bit of an advocacy tool. And, I want to just say that every one of the organizations that stood behind this and were partners in this have their own history of supporting live music, including the City of Toronto. And I want to acknowledge the wonderful staff. It's a tiny but mighty team, as I always describe it, with Mike Tanner in charge, and the whole, arts and culture infrastructure we have, which do a really good job and are very committed themselves to this scene. We're going to have some performances today, which I think is a great way to sort of make this an even more enjoyable experience beyond the boring speeches from people like me. But I think that's an important thing as well, because it brings this down to the level of the artist and reminds us it isn't about companies or even venues or even about some of the small businesses and people who are entrepreneurs who, venture into this field, but it's about artists who bring so much joy to our lives. Somewhere later in my notes, and I won't say it twice, but if you think about, we haven't calculated, we haven't done any studies or polls, but I'll bet you could find a substantial portion of people who would say they really only got through the pandemic in terms of their own mental well-being with all the isolation and the dislocation and all that because of music. You could go through other art forms as well, but music, I mean, the number of people who probably would say they listened to music and it brought them some peace at a time when people were just living this incredibly turbulent life like we've never seen before, I think by itself underlines how important music is. Many of you have heard me say before, you can have in a city where many languages are spoken, and frankly, we're working on this, but many people don't speak English or well. But they can stand at a concert or stand and listen to a piece of music and appreciate it just as much because it's a universal language. They can sort of nod their appreciation. They can feel as good about it. And God knows we've had reasons we want to have smiles put on people's faces in the last period of time, and frankly, sometime yet to come. And so, that goes in addition to the economic benefits. And the study so well sets out the economic benefits, which are massive. I mean, we talk all the time, and they're all important, about banking, and we talk a lot about film. I do. And I talk about music too, but I mean, these are big industries that employ a lot of people, and it's sophisticated talent. Like, it's not just, and I'm not diminishing anybody's job, but I'm just saying these are people who, in terms of the people who work in production and the musicians themselves, this is a sophisticated talent. And it has a huge amount to do. And I was just giving an interview on this subject on the stage at Roy Thompson Hall by myself, because it was an empty hall. We were taping the interview for a conference we're in. it contributes gigantically to the reputation of our city as an innovative, creative place that welcomes creative people and embraces them. And it says a lot about our spirit of economic innovation too. So that's why it's important. And that's why when we talk about our global music ambassadors, the people who've done well around the world, and I would say we have a disproportionately high number of people that come from this city, that were born out of this industry we're talking about here, started out performing in places that were smaller venues in our city. That today carries with it gigantic benefits that benefit a whole bunch of people who might not even say they're interested in the music business, and they should be. And, so I would just say to you that that's why the study is so important. And, the numbers, I'm not going to recite them because others probably will in terms of all the benefits and so on. But if you add that to the music itself and the cultural benefits of that and the storytelling that goes on with that, and then you add things like recording and publishing and instruction and, retailing, you end up with something that has the kind of scale that is deserving of the attention being paid today and going forward out of the study. Because, with studies, it's always a great day when the study comes out and tells you how important the industry is. And it also has the recommendations that start on page 43. I can tell you that. So there's 43 pages of how important it is and how much trouble there is in the business. There's then a bunch of pages after that of recommendations of stuff we have to do. And I'll make brief reference to them as I conclude. But that's the important part of this, is we've got to go forward and make sure that we support this business. And I can just tell you for myself as mayor, because I said from the first day I became mayor, I wanted the city to become even more of a music city than it was. And I stand by that. And I've tried to be helpful with that in concert with Josh Cole, who's no longer on council, Joe Cressy, Mike Layton, Gary Crawford, Anna Bailau, Michael Thompson. And there's much more to be done. And the things that I took note of in the report was, for obviously, the short-term liquidity issues that have faced a lot of venues and people involved in the business. I mean, these are short-term financial issues. When I say short-term, they have such a short-term problem that some might go out of business if something more isn't done. I have been, so you know, and my colleagues know this, advocating virtually every day to Krista Freeland. And when I say advocating, she is there. There's going to be a much more meaningful program brought forward to assist small businesses, including ones in the cultural and hospitality industries, suffering from the effects of COVID-19. I expect the announcement of that program any day. I think in terms of some of the concerns expressed in here about rent and so on, it will address those and be a more flexible program, a more user-friendly program that will perhaps have the money go directly to the people involved instead of through some landlord or some other Byzantine structure. And I think people meant well when they did that. I see what's said about the rent program. I have been advocating on that. I see what's said about our and the other governments that need to reallocate some money. And the final thing that I'll mention is that I stood up at the opening of TIFF, not wanting to ruin the occasion for my two colleagues who were there, Minister Guilbeault from the federal government and Minister McLeod from the provincial government. And I said, I am personally going to call the meeting that says we're going to have to all three get together and discuss. And I was concerned only with Toronto. I'm not trying to be selfish, but I'm the mayor of Toronto, not anywhere else. And I'm going to convene the meeting that says we have two things to discuss. One is that kind of reallocation of money to create some relief from the hardship already experienced because of disappearance of revenues and all the rest. And the second is the longer term, because we've got to discuss the longer term. This is not going to be over next week. The business isn't going to recover next week. I know for my own son, he's told me he's not likely to be back at work until January or something, which just says a lot about all the people that are relying on this. He's just one. So I will just say to you that I'm going to be a tireless advocate on that. I'm going to convene the meeting. We've already taken steps to have that preliminary discussion among the three of us, the mayor of Toronto and the two ministers, just to say, okay, so when are we getting on with sort of figuring out what we can do? And it's not limitless because we're all, suffering from financial problems as well. So I want to thank everybody involved in this, including especially my colleagues in the BIA and the Ontario Creates. I think this is a huge step forward if we go from page 43 and get to work on that stuff. And I'm pledged to do that. And I will look forward to doing it with you. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mayor Tory. Honestly, your understanding of the situation and your commitment and some of the things you've said today are deeply appreciated. And not only are we glad you took time out of your schedule to join us today, just your commitment to the sector and how much it means to you personally and professionally is so evident. So thank you very, very much for your remarks. I would like next to introduce to you a very special person. That would be Mark Garner. Mark is the CEO and Executive Director of the Downtown Young Business Improvement Area and co-sponsor of this study. Through the Downtown Young BIA, Mark has forged a pathway for Canadian BIAs to be better positioned to support and leverage their own local live music assets. Under his leadership, The Downtown Young BIA has created an action plan to stimulate music performance, creation, education, and celebration in the downtown core of the city. Their music strategy builds on the rich music history in Downtown Young in order to create an environment where music can succeed now and in the future. Mark is an advocate, a collaborator, and a true partner to the live music industry. Ladies and gentlemen and friends, please welcome Mark Garner.
Thanks for that, Erin. Very kind words. And I just want to echo, I think, some of the comments you started when you had introduced Mayor Tory. Mayor Tory has, we endorse wholeheartedly his engagement and longstanding vision for Toronto as a music city. He recognizes the importance of boosting the culture and both our economy and the quality of life for all as a part of the music. So thank you, Mayor Tory, as well. And thanks, Erin, and the entire team at Canadian Live Music Association for your ongoing support and the work that you're doing in this sector. Thanks to all. I'm pleased to be here on behalf of the 2,000 members of the Downtown Young BIA and all the people that live, work, play, learn, shop, and are entertained in our legacy venues in our neighborhood. Protecting and promoting live music venues has been a priority for our association, as we recognize the value of live venues and the economically feasibility of them culturally and socially. I sometimes date myself based on my past legacy on Yonge Street, but does anybody remember the 1993 song from a band Opus called Live is Life? It was a one-hit wonder back in the day, but it's those words, live is life. Live music brings life to a neighborhood, especially downtown where people traditionally congregate. It's uplifting, it is relaxing, it's entertaining, and it's an economic driver. People have proven since the first note that was ever struck or sounded that going to listen to live music is a desirable activity. It creates jobs, not just for the musicians, but for the writers, the producers, the managers, the promoters, and not to mention the staff at the venues, the servers, the bartenders, the ushers, and the production technicians, but supports the overall economics and ecosystem of our neighborhoods and the quality of life that we all want. We cannot let, and I think that is part of the report that's today, is we must not let live venues disappear from Toronto's neighborhoods. For many decades in this area I represent, has been the beating heart of Toronto's musical and cultural scene. Iconic venues like Club Blue Note, the Colonial Tavern, Friars, the Brown Derby, right up to Massey Hall and Maple Leaf Gardens were beacons for generations of Toronto music fans. I know this because I'm one of them and I still am today and try to attend as many live performances as possible. This is a long, vibrant history of live music in Toronto, which contains and continues into the present day. But this legacy is threatened and we collectively must save it. A few years ago, the Downtown Young BIA launched a comprehensive music strategy to maintain and enhance Toronto's reputation as a music mecca. That strategy not only includes a nod to the past, celebrating Toronto's music legacy, but also speaks to the present and the future of this sector. Among those initiatives that we had spearheaded was the creation of the Friars Museum, which is a permanent micro museum on the second floor of Shoppers Drug Mart at Yonge and Dundas Square. A legacy building that housed not only the Hard Rock Cafe, but the very famed nightclubs, the Friars and the Nickelodeon. It features a lot of musical artifacts that you can view, along with photos, videos, and stories of many of the music icons who performed on Toronto stages. We've commissioned two 22-story murals on either side of a building on Yonge Street, just south of College, celebrating Toronto's extraordinary music past. We've launched interactive walking tours, highlighting the stories of the musicians in Toronto and where they made their magic. And working with Heritage Toronto, we've installed plaques marking the locations of numerous historic venues. All those initiatives can be celebrated, and we have to keep alive the musical spirit that such is a big part of our past. But I must emphasize, Toronto musical presence is not just historical. It's very much in present tense. In our catchment area alone, we have more than a dozen live performance venues, including Massey Hall, the Carlew, Young Dundas Square, Elgin Winter Garden Theatre, Jazz Bistro, and the Senator and Monarchs Pub are just to name a few. Obviously, these venues have been hurt by COVID-19 pandemic, which has only exacerbated the challenges that we were already facing. And those are the challenges quantified in the North City report being released today, and we must collectively address them. It's important for us culturally, socially, and economically. And let's remember there is a demand for live music. We know this based on our reaction to our Play the Parks programs, as we have lunchtime and evening concerts. And I like to basically say that Play the Parks for us has been one of the longest standing festivals in Toronto. And last year, in our 7th season, we had drawn almost 100,000 people to listen to live music in parks and in public space. During COVID, we moved it online, calling it Play the Parks on Location, where we recorded performances, and those were performed and recorded in live venues that we need to save and promote. There's a lot of very talented musicians in Toronto, and not all of them become famous, but they live in your neighborhoods, they play in venues in those neighborhoods, and they're driven to create music. If you're lucky enough to live in a 2-story or a 3-story neighborhood in Toronto, you have an increased chance of hearing a musician practicing for a gig or a child practicing for band. It's the joy you hear. It's the life, vibrancy, and spirit that we want to see in our neighborhoods. You don't hear much of that in an 80-story condo tower, which is all the more reason we need to work together to ensure there are live music venues at ground level. Musicians need a place to play, and I hope the findings of the report today will be a catalyst, a foundation for advocacy to ensure that the City of Toronto and the people of Toronto continue to embrace musicians playing live in front of appreciative audiences. Simply put, we need to get our act together to keep their acts together. And most of all, we need to recognize the work we are doing is not necessarily for us, it's for the generations that follow. I encourage all of us, if you haven't read the report yet, please read the report and be part of that future. And Aaron, I thank you on behalf of Downtown Young BIA, our businesses, the organizations and institutions and residents that we represent. We're pleased to be part of the Canadian Live Music Association, and specifically this initiative. It has been needed for a long time, and we look forward to working together with all the partners to keep live music alive in the city. Thanks, Aaron.
Wise, wonderful, well thought out words, Mark. As always, really appreciate your comments. Thank you. Next, we're going to move to another amazing human being. Speaking as a representative of the Toronto Music Advisory Committee, Mr. Sean Bowering is a musician, a business person, entrepreneur, and music industry advocate with over 30 years involvement in the Toronto music scene. Owner and creator of Transmit Presents, as well as the Garrison and the Baby G live music venues, Sean is a board member of Little Portugal BIA, as well as the co-founder and director of the Dundas West Fest, a favorite annual Toronto Street Festival. Sean, we're so happy to have you here with us today, and we want to thank you for your steadfast leadership on behalf of venues in Toronto and right across the country. Ladies and gentlemen and friends, Mr. Sean Bowering.
Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate it, and all the speakers that have talked so far. It's great to hear from you. One could read the North City Toronto Live Music Report and only focus on the hardships that Toronto music venues are currently facing. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It has been an extremely difficult 7 months. Not only are we not presenting concerts featuring great bands and artists, my heart breaks for all the great people that work at the venues. Talent buyers, sound techs, the bartenders, the cleaning person, security staff, right through to concert promoters, agents, and stage crew. The global pandemic has completely silenced what is usually a really vibrant, noisy bunch of people. Having acknowledged all those hardships, As I read deeper in the Nordicity report, I marvel at what we, in normal times, the live music community, collectively bring to life every single day. It's truly amazing. And that brings me to the importance of this report. It highlights our strengths and weaknesses, as well as some immediate and future challenges. It shines the light on the gray areas, illuminating the unique balance of art and commerce that Toronto music live scene is. Ultimately, the information in the report is a toolkit that not only helps us self-evaluate, but gives us the tools to present the value of live music industry to the powers that be in language that is understandable to all. Takes a bit of the mystery away. As a TMAC member, along with countless others, I've been engaged with municipal, provincial, and federal governments advocating for live music venues. We've had a few notable wins that I would like to outline. Toronto City Council unanimously passed a bylaw reducing venues property tax by 50%, retroactive until January 2020. I'd like to acknowledge the support of Mike Tanner at the Music Office, Councillor Bly, Cressy, and Thompson, as well as Mayor Tory for their dedicated hard work on this accomplishment. This would not have happened without all those individuals' great efforts. On the federal level, the relentless work of Aaron Benjamin and Canadian Live Music Associates successfully advocating the Ministry of Heritage for a dedicated $23 million emergency fund for live music venues and other live music industries sector. It's a great first step, and we look forward to working with the Ministry of Heritage to further policy and support for the short, medium, and long term. These outstanding accomplishments provide fuel to tackle the immediate challenges and work toward long-term recovery and sustain live music in Toronto. On closing, I will reiterate the importance of Nordicity report, not only the challenges, but celebrating the importance of the Toronto live music sector. It's really important that we stay focused, stay positive, and get to the other side of this. There's a lot of us working on this, and I thank everyone's that's attending today. They're fantastic work, and we are looking to the future.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you. Really appreciate those words, especially coming from a venue owner, and all of the last 7 months and all of the hard work that you and your colleagues in Toronto have been trying to accomplish on behalf of many. So it's now my pleasure to introduce, we keep talking about this report. Let's hear and see a little bit about it from Christian Roberts, who will share some high-level findings. Christian is a managing partner of Nordicity and a project lead, the project lead on this study. Christian has led projects for clients such as Ontario Creates and Music Canada, among many, many others, leading extensive primary data collection exercises to provide strategic advice for sustained industry growth. Christian is a patient, dedicated genius whose leadership, especially in the music space, has enabled many of us to be able to tell our stories with the kind of real data and intelligence our sector has needed for the greatest impact. Ladies and gentlemen and friends, Christian Roberts.
Thanks, Erin. And I'm now blushing on camera, so I blame you for that. All right, well, let's see if I can make the technology work. And we should now see, what do we see? Do we see the right thing? Excellent, sounds good. Okay, so I have now the unenviable task of fitting a 51-page presentation into 5 minutes. So let's see how well I do. Let's see here. Yeah, so as we've alluded to a couple of times, the origin story of this report is a little bit different. We were asked to look about a year and a half ago, asked to start looking at what was then the plight of live music industry, live music venues as they were starting to close. So we wanted to establish a baseline as to what that might look like. You know, where were the venues? How are they being used? What impact did they have on the city? And at that point, what challenges did they face? And then we were about to issue our final report, and the date was something like March 3rd. And we were editing, and then COVID happened. And so it became immediately clear that efforts needed to be focused on A, keeping the venues around, and then B, quantifying and trying to outline, trying to explain what the impact of COVID-19 was on those venues. And then, of course, we then had to see, okay, well, what recommendations need to change? What are we going to have to say to help these venues succeed in the immediate term, so that they can get to the short term and medium term and get some solutions to those pre-existing conditions. So this is the report that we ended up with, this sort of before, during, and after. I think one of the most important things to remember when thinking about live music in Toronto is that it's played in hundreds and hundreds of places around the city. But only some of those places, about 200 or so, feature music as an important source of their revenue, or that it's really core to their brand identity. And again, in that 200 or so venues, you end up with about 75 that have music as their sort of core operating business, or that they frequently play music. And so when we talk about, you'll see big numbers in terms of numbers of venues in the report, and then we hear about 5 or 6 really important, memorable venues closing. You're like, well, that's 5 or 6 out of 500. That can't be that bad, but it's actually 5 or 6 out of this core 75 venues that form the basis of many of the impacts that we're gonna talk to. The other thing I think is really important when we start thinking about the scope of live music venues in the city is, absolutely, as Mark pointed out, there's a concentration of venues in the downtown core, downtown Yonge, but there is no ward in Toronto where there is not a music venue. They're everywhere. And so they animate and bring communities together from one end of the city to the other, from the very top down beyond the waterfront, as of course they exist on the islands too. But how do they contribute? And I think Tory, you did a great job of encapsulating the various ways that the live music community in Toronto contributes to the city. Most obviously to the music ecosystem, in that they are the place in which artists generate a substantial portion of their livelihood, develops the artists' careers, allows them to build audiences, build and hone their craft. And moreover, it enables a bunch of other things in the wider music ecosystem. You can't have promoters if there's no shows to promote. And then, as I will get to very shortly, they do add directly to Toronto's economy. This ecosystem contributes by virtue of the operation of the venues themselves, and by attracting more tourists to Toronto than would otherwise come. And perhaps most importantly, just makes Toronto a better place to be, a better place to live, to go out, to listen, to enjoy oneself, to relax, and these days, to just survive. So speaking of economic impacts, this is that number that was alluded to earlier that no one wanted to scoop. So about in 2019, in the before times, over $850 million was contributed to the GDP of the city or of the province by virtue of live music. And that again stems from running the venues themselves and attracting tourists to come to Toronto. In turn, that economic activity supported, over 10,000 what we call FTEs, which is a kind of the equivalent of a full-time job. Now, of course, we can't talk about full-time jobs because, as we know in the music industry, there's a variety of different ways that people are employed. Similarly, it contributes over $60 million to the tax pots in both the province and at the federal government. In terms of COVID, again, we have lost at least 11 venues since March, 9 of which are from that list of 75 or so core or frequent venues, which is about 13% of all such venues. And these red numbers here, which I'm not going to read out, they're getting bigger every day. We had to pick a date because we had to write a report, and that was September 3rd. So it is very likely that more red dots are on this map than we are displaying here. And again, as was alluded to several times before, there were many pre-existing conditions that happened before COVID. The insurance was expensive. Rent was high and growing. Property taxes were problematic. All COVID did was make that worse, and in turn provides this looming specter of will it change consumer habits? Will audiences come back once there is a vaccine? Once physical distancing restrictions go away. Of course, as Mark pointed out earlier, there is consistent demand for live music, but in what form? And will it be the same as it was before? So to try to address some of these problems, we've been working with the study partners, arrived on a number of recommendations. As I said, they start on page 42 of the report, and yes, you should read those pages. Well, I'll touch on some of the immediate term actions here. I'm quite heartened to hear about that this first recommendation we have to reimagine some programs to address those immediate needs, like paying rent might be in the works. And I'm point out again that spearheading an insurance group program would make it easier to assess those risks of COVID-19, which are hard for anybody to understand, and make it easier to obtain and ultimately pay for. Fortunately, there's an industry association poised to be able to coordinate such efforts at the Canadian Live Music Association. We want to applaud the city for amending its tax classifications, as alluded to a couple of times, and ask only that important step be made permanent. And finally, for the purposes of today's discussion, we recognize, as was referred to before, that the COVID relief funding, the emergency funds, will eventually dry up. And to ensure that we do not simply return to the pre-COVID struggles, we of course recommend that the process of reallocating some of those public funds begin now. We all know that programs, specifically funding programs, do take a while to get off the ground, to be created, to have guidelines, juries, whatever they require. So we want to stress the urgency of starting that work now, so that we don't end up with a situation some months from now in January, when everybody hopefully is back, putting on shows. We're just back to where we were when we had that original study with many of these same recommendations in early March. And I'll leave it there, only to say that I hope that the hard work that all of the study partners put into this study will translate into the action that we all see the promise for, and we'll start to realize realize the benefits that I alluded to, and we can start getting back. Next time somebody does this report, those numbers will be even bigger, and we'll have many more positive things to say. Back to you, Erin.
Christian, that was a tall order, getting the essential top-level highlights into a very short presentation. So thank you, very impactful. And of course, couldn't agree with you more in terms of how to leverage these recommendations moving forward in short order. And here we are 40 minutes into this, and we're talking about live music, and it's about time we got to this portion, because we can't talk about live music without live music. Artists are, of course, at the heart of this study. They're at the heart of our work, and they're likely at the heart of yours. It's with that in mind that I'm thrilled to introduce you to our next guest, who will play 2 songs from her home studio, presented in partnership with our friends at Small World Music in Global Toronto. Ammoye is a reggae fusion artist and 4-time Juno nominee who looks to spread her light through her music. She's been an artist in the Toronto scene since her teens, playing the likes of Lula, the Rivoli, the Mod Club, venues that have been pivotal in both her development as an artist and her ability to connect with an audience, particularly as an independent artist. Ladies and gentlemen and friends, we're very excited to welcome Ammoye.
Hi guys, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and to be a part of this initiative. As you know, live music is so important. Without live music and music in general, it's a city without heart. It's a society without a soul. It's a neighborhood or a community without spirit. So I'm happy to be a part of this and to share with you the light This is the first song I'm going to do with you, for you, and then Shooting, which is about anti-violence. This is the light. Change is the new normal. Change is the new. Wake up feeling good. Wake up renewed. Wake up, the time is now. Ooh, things are changing up. I see the world a lot different now. Look at me, tell me what do you see? We are more than just this 3D image. We are like energy, observing elements, observing the rising up. The light that will take you out. The light that will take you out. The light that will take you out the dark. The light that will take you out the dark. The light that will take you out. The light that will take you out. The light that will take you out the dark. The light that will take you out the dark. Exodus, consciousness. The people want changes, righteousness. I'm confident and very, very sure. I want love to represent I and I across the globe. Look at me, tell me what do you see? We are more than just this 3D image. We are like energy, the light that will take you out, the light that will take you out, the light that will take us out the dark, the light that will take you out the dark, the light that will take you out, the light that will take you out, the light that will take you out the dark, the light that will take us out the dark. That will take you out the dark, take you out the dark. Thank you, guys. Thank you. The next song I'm going to do for you guys is called Shooting. And again, this is about anti-violence. It's promoting love and unity coming together, not breaking us apart. So hopefully you guys enjoy this one. This is for y'all. Shooting. The situation, nation is getting out of control. the children who don't know where to go, with nobody to teach them, how do they ever know where is the right? Stop doing wrongs. All the youths them seem to know is how to kill another man. Stop the shoot, shoot, shooting. The shoot, shoot, shooting. Stop the war. Stop the war. Yeah. It's icky out there. Crazy, me not gonna tell no lie. Every week, every other day, another brother lose them eyes. And they don't know how we come by. No respect for themselves or the most high. Your time I come, I show ya. Until you judge a man, you have a cry. Where is the right? Stop doing wrong. All the youths them seem to notice how to kill another man. Stop the shoot, shooting. The shoot, shooting. Stop the war. Stop the war. Stop the shoot, shooting. The shoot, shooting. Stop the war. Stop the war. Chop. 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 Stop the war. Stop the war. Stop the war. Stop the war. Listen, you say you live by the gun, you are gonna die by it. You make another man blood run, you pay for it. And when you think it's all done, that won't be it. Your soul will pay for your bad deeds. Remember this. They say you live by the gun, you are gonna die by it. You make another man blood run, you pay for it. And when you think it's all done, that won't be it. Your soul will pay for your bad deeds. Remember, stop the war. Stop the war. Stop the war. Stop the war. Where is the right? Stop doing wrongs. All you youths who seem to know how to kill another man. Stop the shoot, shooting. The shoot, shooting. Stop the shoot, shooting. The shoot, shooting. Stop the war. Stop the war. Stop the war. Stop the war. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Ammoye. That was very powerful.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you. And I know it's hard to sing into a phone. And for all of us who wish we were rocking out at Lula watching this, I know it really kind of hammers home the whole point. So I know it isn't easy to perform in this context, but thank you for helping us really amplify our message today. There's no better way to do it. So ladies and gentlemen, this concludes remarks from our speakers and performances. We will next go to Q&A from media. If you could signal your interest in asking a question via the chat window, you will have time for one question and one follow-up. I will call you based on order of requests in the chat. We will have approximately 5 to 10 minutes maximum for questions. Briefly, before we move to questions, a reminder that we would ask speakers, counselors, and Ammoye to stay on the call after the Q&A period for a group photo, which we really appreciate having all of you. And lastly, I thank again our partners and sponsors who made this study possible, those being the Dundas West BIA, Lula Lounge, Resound, Music Canada, Tourism Toronto, and especially the City of Toronto, Mayor Tory, Mike Tanner, Downtown Young BIA, Mark Garner, the Toronto BIA, and to all of our friends at Ontario Creates. And lastly, I would like to thank my colleagues, Krista Roberts and Greg McClary, Mike Tanner, my team, Victoria Shepard, Maddie Oliver, Nicole Auger, Alex Kenzel, Victoria Lord, and Martine Levy, for the many hours of hard work, and to our incredible live music community who responded to surveys, interviews, and provided the data and stories we needed to compile this compelling, critically important work. So we will now take questions, and I will return to my chat here, and here we go. So forgive me while I get oriented, I believe. So we have a question from Jennifer Pagliaro. Jennifer, and to anyone who's going to be asking a question, you are welcome to activate your video and audio so that we can hear and see you. Next, we'll go to Mark Douglas after the first speaker.
Hey there, it's Jennifer. Can you hear me?
Yes, Jennifer, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. I just have a question for Mayor Tory and also for Councillor Cressy if he wants to answer. I had spoken to the Premier's office earlier about the medical officer of health's requests to the province in order to enact further restrictions. The Premier's office has written back saying that they are not willing to impose any further restrictions until they exhaust all other efforts, and they refuse to say whether the public health measures table has even considered Toronto's request specifically. And also they say that the medical officer of health has her own authority to issue class orders. And I'm just hoping that you can respond to that, Mayor Tory.
Now, Jennifer, you should have prefaced that question by saying you were wishing that you were rocking out at the Lulu Lounge instead of asking questions about very important matters of public health, but I know that that's in your heart. May I just say this? First of all, the discussions about the medical officer of health's request are still under active discussion. There are discussions going on back and forth about the particularly acute situation we face in Toronto, with numbers even as recently as today coming out that are cause for great continuing concern on the part of us all. Secondly, there has been no communication to us about what the province's intentions are in that regard, though I know that in a number of different places, these requests and requests from others and plenty of data that's been put forward by us and by others are under very, very active consideration. And so that's all I can say, because I just don't know the results of that consideration, including I don't know anything about what you just said. Finally, I will say that we have supplied a lot of information to the province. They were called yesterday, as recently as yesterday, requesting more information, which was also sent to them. And I would just say that I'm glad that there's that very active level of cooperation and discussion and collaboration and so on going on, so as to make sure that all of us reach the right place in terms of doing whatever we can to stop the spread of this virus.
Do you have a follow-up, Jennifer? Okay, we'll move on. Thank you for your question. We'll go to Mark Douglas from 680 News.
Hi, folks. Bear with me. I think, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Oh, good. Thank you. Just to follow up on the COVID question, I do have a question about the music industry first, but Mayor Tory, given that these new record high numbers that you say are a grave concern for all, and given that you are in fact waiting for some response from Queen's Park about Dr. Davila's request for Queen's Park to take some action here, is there anything left that the city can do to implement any further health and safety measures? And especially, can that be done before Thanksgiving family get-togethers really take off?
Well, I will just say that the medical officer of health for Toronto would not have made the request she did if she had it within her own powers to do those things that she recommended herself. And again, I will say, and I don't want to get into one of these kind of battling legal opinion discussions, but the lawyers did do as I requested, which is to go into a room and have a discussion with each other. And I don't want to put words into the mouth or opinions into the onto the papers of provincial lawyers, but I can only say that our people came out of that meeting with the recognition having been extended on the part of the provincial people that the powers the city had were not as broad as had been suggested publicly earlier on, and that the most effective broad-reaching powers to do things to in the interest of public health and to stop the spread of COVID-19 rested with the province of Ontario. And that is what our lawyers came back from that meeting to tell me. And so I would only say that I think there have been a number of changes that our medical officer of health has implemented in recent times, some of which the city council had to endorse and did. And so I think that while there may be some other additional measures that are narrower in their focus, that the City of Toronto, I'm happy to say, on the watch of the medical officer of health, and mostly at her instigation, has brought forward many, many measures to stop the spread. And I'm not being critical of the province in that. We've worked well together. We continue to discuss the challenge posed by these very alarming numbers, and we will continue those discussions until such time as they decide on what they were going to do. And then, you know what, we'll continue the discussions after that, because this is a rapidly changing situation about which we don't know everything that we need to know, all of us, the scientists included, and we just have to make sure we protect the public, protect health, and protect lives, and that's exactly what we'll do.
Thank you. And then just on the topic of the music study here, which is really fascinating, and it has a lot of great information. So thank you all for doing this and sharing this. And perhaps some of the musicians would want to respond to this. There was a lot of comments about everything that music does contribute to the city, and that when you come back, you don't want to face the same old problems as you were before. What specifically in the study is going to prevent those same problems from coming back? And just can you give us highlights of what the musicians consider to be the most important recommendations for moving forward?
Do we have, Sean, would you be interested in responding to that as a musician, or Ammoye? I'm not sure if Ammoye's had a chance to review the recommendations thoroughly enough to respond, but you'd be welcome to as well.
Hi there. The study was long coming. It was designed about 3 or 4 years ago. And COVID had put the accelerator on. Live music was actually taking a bit of an upswing. We are facing challenges that are unprecedented during COVID. There was challenges before. The Nordic City report outlines, it gives us the tools to speak with politicians, municipal, federal, provincial. It outlines the importance as an industry and the spin-off of economic effect as well as cultural effect that live music venues bring. So there's a lot in there. There's a lot of data, but it just shows the importance of the industry as a whole. And we didn't have that snapshot before. So that's important to as a tool for us and administrators and counselors and the mayor, et cetera, to use moving forward to make it a stronger sector.
Thank you, Sean. Jesse, go ahead.
Well, I might just jump in on that. I mean, I can't speak as a musician, but I can certainly assure you that an awful lot of my friends are active working musicians, and I can tell you just anecdotally, the last several months have just been absolutely devastating for their livelihoods. A lot of them have really lost their primary source of income through performance, and so I can attest to the fact that a great number of the conversations I'm having with those friends of mine center around their commitment to their career moving forward. And there are a number that are seriously questioning it because they have to put food on the table for their families and they have to pay rent. So what we're seeing right now in the short term is a real threat to just our artist population. And I think we need to be very, very sensitive to that. And in terms of the recommendations in the report that are going to have the greatest impact for artists moving forward, I think we just really need to recognize that in this day and age, once we get past the pandemic, live performance is going to be the lifeline that they need to be able to get back on track. And the challenge that we see in front of us is with the attrition of performance venues, and especially the small ones that we've seen early on in the pandemic. And thank you, Christian, for even showing some of the data around those venues that have already lost everything. And we know that a lot more are on the horizon here. If those venues don't exist when we come out of the pandemic, there will be no place for those artists to perform. And that is going to have the same kind of impact in our ecosystem that you would see in any other ecosystem, where we rely, even venues like the ones that I represent with Massey Hall and Roy Thompson Hall, we rely on that development stream. We rely on our artists being prosperous and successful and being able to build their audiences over time. If you take out that entry point, then all of a sudden that food chain gets very seriously interrupted, and artists are not going to have the ability to level up and enjoy those fulfilling careers that they really ought to have. So I think when you go through the recommendations, you'll find just about everything in there speaks towards the importance of preserving the existing cultural infrastructure that we have with venues, as well as finding paths forward for the longer term to make it easier to open new ones as we go. So.
Thank you, Jesse. Appreciate the response. Mayor Tory, I think we have time for one more question. This was Paul Sanders from Cashbox Radio has asked me to read it on his behalf due to technical difficulties. Mayor Tory, what about the smaller 500-seat theaters like the Royal Theatre in Little Italy who need tax breaks, etc.?
Well, look, it's a challenge for us. I mean, I'm very proud of the fact that we came forward with the measures we did under the leadership of some of the other councillors and myself supporting it as well to effectively cut the taxes in half for those venues. And I think the benefit to them in this calendar year, 2020, will be about $4 million going from memory. And so there's always fine tuning to be done on these things. And there's always, when you come up with one of these programs or measures, a kind of a threshold level at which you have people included or not included that can cause an unfairness. So I think that it's part of an ongoing review of that kind of measure. But just as importantly, I mentioned earlier on, and it's talked about in the report, the notion of what I call relief funding, some of which has been allocated, but nowhere near enough. I think the number is like $23 million across the whole country, and that's a great start. And I commend the government of Canada for caring enough to do that. But the point I made earlier on about the need for all of the arts to receive some further relief funding to make up for the terrible losses they've experienced, not to mention the artists, but the venues, and to have a path forward. And I think this has been discussed a number of times by people in this presentation today. Is something that I'm on top of. And that's precisely why I said we had to have a meeting involving the three levels of government to discuss not just music, but all of the arts, including TIFF and including film, people in the film business and people in other forms of the arts that also have either venues or other kinds of damages they've suffered during all of this. So, point received, all venues have suffered, all the way up to the Roy Thompson Halls of the world, but all the way down to the tiniest venue in Kensington and those in between. And I think sometimes those in between get caught, is sort of between the different sets of rules. And if somebody wants to be in touch with Mike Tanner, myself, Joe Cressy about that, we will certainly take a look at that group and see if they're inadequately dealt with and try to help.
Great response, Mayor Tory. I'm enjoying being your press secretary. Is there an opening?
You don't want the job.
Do we have any, I'm just seeing one more chat here, a message from Jane Stevenson, Toronto Sun, for Sean. Okay, thank you. Jane, would you like, if we can squeeze one more in, I think, if that's all right with you, Mayor Tory?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, great, and something that Karen, all right. So, this is the question from Jane Stevenson from the Toronto Sun. Does this report go far enough to save venues?
Like I mentioned before, I think it's a toolkit. There's some self-evaluation that we have been doing as an industry, and we've been working on that for years. It's been very beneficial. The City of Toronto, opening the music office 5 years ago, I constantly use this one-liner that I was the first guy to phone Mike Tanner with 50 things that we needed to do. We've got some of those accomplished. Again, it's a toolkit and it's a way forward. There's a whole bunch of advocates on here, and we've been working tirelessly locally and nationally to support live music venues. There's many pieces to the puzzle, but as far as saving venues, that's up to all of us. And again, I'll reiterate that this is a toolkit, and it gives a snapshot of where we are, what our strengths and weaknesses are, and how we can move forward and be successful in the future.
Aaron,
Thank
can
you.
I just comment on that to say, and I'm sure this is one instance in which I can speak for my colleagues. I mean, we have, as Sean so correctly referred to it, we have a toolbox that we established. And I guess the first part of the toolbox was the appointment of Mike Tanner and the establishment of an office, the appointment of a music advisory committee. We then moved on to develop all kinds of programs for musicians to perform live and be exposed in the city hall itself and at the airport and different places like that. We brought forward the tax measure that we've discussed today to give tax relief to venues. We now have to tackle things like the insurance issue that's been raised in the report, the permitting issue that's raised in the report, the funding issue that's obviously raised in the report. So the toolbox is growing every day, and the entire objective of it is to have a healthy industry overall, but in particular as well to preserve and protect as many venues as possible, knowing that some come and go, because we do have stories of new venues coming. But so I can just say the answer to the question is yes. That's exactly why we're having this discussion, which is about the entire industry and its health and well-being, and the artists, but also the venues. And I think that some of these measures we're taking, look at the insurance issue, for example. The whole idea of a group pool, for insurance is to really give benefit to the smaller people. You use the heft and the weight of the bigger people and the help of the city, if that comes to pass, to help smaller people. And it's a small item, but it's all part of the toolbox that Sean made reference to. And I can just tell you as mayor, I'm completely committed with my colleagues on the Music Advisory Committee and on the council to find as many things, many tools to put in that toolbox and to make use of as we possibly can.
Fantastic. We did have a question in the chat from Karen Bliss, who had to leave, who writes for Billboard. And Jesse, this was directed at you and I. I wonder if you'd like to make a quick response for Karen before we finally wrap up here.
Sure. So the question is, what are the specific recommendations in the report that members of the live music industry in the States can apply to their cities? And I guess what I would say is, obviously, this report is very much focused on the city of Toronto, and a lot of the recommendations are equally specific. But maybe what I'll do is take a little bit of a step back and just talk about, and this applies not just to municipalities in the United States, but also across Ontario, across Canada. I think what's really important is, first off, generating a good understanding of your local music scene. And this is largely what this study has done for us here, to not only understand the social and cultural value of live music in your home, but also to understand its economic impact and the amount of job creation that it drives. And we've certainly done an awful lot of research here, and it's an important step towards understanding, but also to the points of Mayor Tory and Sean. This report really just provides recommendations that all strive to do the same thing, and that provides, or it seeks to provide a roadmap for sustainability and long-term prosperity for the live music sector. And if we follow those recommendations, again, here in Toronto, they're very specific, but if we follow those recommendations, we're going to go a really long way to being able to set it up so that when we emerge from the pandemic, these businesses that employ so many people are going to thrive. We're going to set it up so that artists can continue to practice their craft and build audiences and continue to entertain and improve the lives of the people around us. And there's no question that there are all kinds of industries that are suffering through the pandemic, but I think, as Mayor Tory noted, very few have the power to heal and bring people together in a situation like this than live music. So I think in terms of recommendations that can be applied elsewhere, it's really about assessing your own local live music scene and figuring out what needs to be done to try and preserve it. So again, I just applaud Mayor Tory, all of the councillors, and everybody who's been a participant in this study for getting our specific set of recommendations formalized.
Excellent. Thank you, Jesse. I see no further questions, and I'm sure we've taken up enough of your afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining on YouTube via our live stream, and those of you here on Zoom, particularly to the media, our special guests and VIPs, and to our team who put this together today. Outstanding work. It is very strange doing these things on Zoom. Even 7 months in, it's still a challenge, but it is an effective way to communicate and amplify our messaging, which I believe we have done today with the help of our speakers. So we will say goodbye to our friends from the media, and we will keep our councillors, Mayor Tory, Ammoye, and our speakers here in Zoom just for very few minutes as we snap some photos. And thank you again very much to our friends at Nordicity and Mike Tanner, who I think should be in the photo, for all of your hard work in making this happen today. This is a beginning.